Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Dave here with Go Gamers, and today we got a PS5 that's actually having internal SSD issues where it'll play the game for a little bit, it'll start to pixelate, it'll crash, it'll have trouble going to the dashboard, and the customer actually attempted a self-repair, and now it's just not turning on at all. So let's go over to the upper cam and see exactly what we got going on today. All right, so we have a PS5 game console, and as explained earlier, it is having what I believe to have SSD issues. The customer was having issues with the game console crashing, um, pixelating, and then it kept on boot looping over and over and over again to the dashboard. So typically, what I see with boot loops is usually something going on with the SSD. Now, the reason why obviously it's pretty much open right now is because the customer opened it up. Luckily, I have, I separated all of the screws and everything so I can make it a lot easier when it comes to doing this repair. Now, what the customer actually tried to do by himself, he tried to reflow that SSD chip. If you don't know what a reflow means, it means just pretty much just heating up a BGA chip of sorts, allowing the solder balls to melt, and seeing if they could be able to reconnect to the motherboard. And obviously that was unsuccessful because after he tried to reflow it, now it doesn't turn on. And I'll show you guys. So you can see I press the power button, we get no lights, no nothing. And that is a symptom of one of the problems or issues why the game console won't turn on. So a issue why the game console won't turn on could be HDMI IC, your SSD, and your south bridge. Those could be common chip issues why it's not turned on. Now, obviously, we know for a fact it's the SSD because that's the only thing he did. You know, he reflowed that, and unless he did something else that didn't tell us, but this customer seems like he knows what he's talking about and knows what he's doing. So let's go ahead. Let's get this clamp off, and let's get down to the SSD and see what we got going on. So here is the PS5 motherboard. Here we have our SSD controller, we have our south bridge, we have our HDMI IC. He went in, he tried to reflow here, didn't work. We can also see he wiped up the thermal compound that keeps that chip cool when he tried to reflow it. So now, sorry, it's kind of hard to get good colors. Let me get this camera right. Okay, cool. So here's our SSD controller. Now I have a totally different SSD controller from a donor motherboard that I'm going to take this off, and then I'm going to put this on there, and I'm going to use my WDS 620. Now my WDX 620 is a reball machine that I have right over here. I don't use it too much, just because a lot of the stuff I could just usually use with my heat wand and whatnot. Heat up the chip. I have a suction machine right up here on the repair bench. I could just take it straight off, and I could just do everything just straight from my desk. But I want to actually be able to put this very, very expensive piece of equipment to work today. So we're going to use the BGA machine, and I actually already have the profile set in there. So let's go ahead and let's go over to that machine. Let's get this lifted off the motherboard and see about getting this replaced. Before we go over to the WDS 620 Reballing machine, I'm going to apply some Kapton tape around the chip, the SSD controller, just to make sure all of our components around it stays cool, doesn't heat up. All right, so we have the Kapton tape placed all around the chip, and we have it placed underneath the chip. And now I'm just going to move this over to my reball machine, and we're going to get this chip lifted off the motherboard. All right, so we are at my reball machine. As you can see, this is my setup. This is where I can set my profiles. And here we are right here. So let's go ahead and also look at the VGA cam so we can get a better look. And we can see there is our SSD controller on the screen now. And what I'm going to do is go down here. I'm going to set my profile and we're going to prepare this thing to get lifted off the board. All right, so I have my curve set. I also had to make sure I had everything around the SSD to make sure it's propped up. So when we go on ahead and get it lifted off the board, it can get lifted off the board with no issues. I'm going to apply some flux. I'm going to turn on my task illumination so I can apply some flux around this SSD. Flux has been applied. Now let's start the removal process. So we now have the SSD controller lifted off the motherboard. I'm going to allow the motherboard to obviously stay here because the fans and the jets will make sure the motherboard cools down at an appropriate temperature. And I'm going to leave the SSD controller up there before I lift it off because there's also a fan built in here that will cool down the SSD before I take it off so I won't burn my hands up or burn any of my tools. So I'm trying to get that SSD controller off. So let's go back over to the repair bench and let's do a reball on the SSD controller that I pulled out of that other PS5. All right, so I have the SSD controller in the BGA rig. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some leaded solder. I'm going to apply it around this SSD. And what this does is it lowers the melting temperature of the solder that's currently on there. So this is a good technique to be able to quickly get solder off of here. So I just create this solder ball, go around, and I make sure I hit every pad, get that melting temperature lowered. All right, guys, so we're under the microscope now. Now I got my desolder braid. Just gonna take it, and I'm just gonna go in circles. And we're gonna get all this solder off this SSD controller. Now I have my toothbrush. I'm gonna go around it, clean it, check my work, and see if there's anything that I missed. Okay, so there's a couple spots that I want to go over just one more time. So I'm going to apply some more flux. And the type of flux I'm using too is 559 Amtech flux. So I'm just going to go around, apply it to this chip. All right, so I'm just going to run back over one more time with this toothbrush. And I have a cloth that I'm cleaning it off with as well. And what I do with my toothbrush is I dip it in 99% IPA, go around it, clean it with the toothbrush, and I take my cloth and I just gently go around it. And that is pretty much it. Looks good enough to me. All right, so we got the SSD controller in my VGA reball jig. I apply just a bead of flux on the SSD controller. I go around it with my finger, and now I put my stencil on top of it. I put some non-leaded solder balls on top of it, wiggle it around to get everything right. And once we get everything right, then we're going to pop the stencil off and see how it works. Now, the reason why I'm doing a voiceover now, my previous mic broke, so let's finish up the rest of the video like that. Now we're going to move on to the heat plate. So I moved the SSD controller over to my heat plate, allowed it to heat up so the solder balls can melt on top of it. And now we're going back over to our upper cam on the WDX620. And let's go ahead and get this new SSD controller solder onto the motherboard. First, we obviously have to go ahead and remove all the old solder. So I apply some flux, we remove all the old solder off the motherboard before we put our SSD controller on there. So now we're moving over to our optical alignment tool, and what this does is this makes sure that the VGA chip, so in this case the SSD controller, is fully lined up with all the pads on the motherboard. So once it's soldered on, the pads and all the solder balls are soldered into the right place. So now we got everything aligned and we're getting everything flowed onto the board now. So let's get this SSD controller flowed onto the board. So now we're coming on the tail end of that. Now we got it back on the repair bench. We're going to put this thing back together, get it all the way assembled. Let's turn it on. Bam. There we have it. We have the PS logo right there with the new SSD chip in there. And as you can see, it says not properly turned off now. This SSD controller, we took it out of another PS5. So this one right here obviously still has all the data from the other owner who had this on their PS5. So everything is good to go now. We have no issues. As you can see, I'm hooking up my test controller just to make sure the functionality of it works, making sure it can go to the menu. It's not freezing up. Everything looks good. We have our profile right there. You can see we log in, and that's it. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this, make sure you go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side. See ya.